Hi, I'm Jeff, the SP Spaz, and I'm back with another exciting video that I hope will serve to entertain and educate you. And this particular video I've been wanting to do for several weeks because it's a response to a video Mike at NF Geeks did about the Scholarchy proposal. And the first video that he did with Josh, I believe it was, on the Scholarchy, kind of riled me up. I watched it and I'm like, ugh, I had this, strong aversion to the concept. Um, but it didn't really, I never got to the point where I was like, well, I just really have to respond to this. I mean, I think I commented, but I didn't, it didn't quite rise to the level of making a video response. But somebody else did, and later on, Mike then responded to that. And that video did inspire me to respond because um, the tone and some of the just the premise presented in the video by Mike was quite offensive to me in several different ways, and so that's what I wanted to respond to in this video was kind of go point by point with some of the things he said in there and point out just how wrong I think they are. Now I want to preface this by saying that I have nothing against Mike personally. I love Mike. I love NF Geeks. And most of the overwhelming majority of the videos that he's made and most of the people he's talked to on there, I've not only found entertaining but also interesting and sometimes educating, and it's a cool thing. I'm glad the channel exists. I'm glad Mike stayed with it and got back into doing more videos. And in fact, he's even invited me to be on NF Geeks. And if we can, work out the time and stuff, hopefully we'll do that soon. So I wanted to say all that because I don't want anyone to interpret this as any kind of attack on Mike personally, like I'm saying I think that, he's some kind of evil person or something like that because he presented this particular proposal for remaking the American government. Now, I want to start by saying I see plenty of flaws with the American government as it is, so I'm in no means trying to use this video to defend our current federal government as being any kind of shining example on how to do anything. But then, of course, that's part of my point in making this video. But my overwhelming feeling, before I get into the specifics, was that this particular video Mike made as a follow-up seemed to me, I would describe it as dripping with arrogance. Now, again, that's not me necessarily asserting that Mike himself is overall arrogant, but this particular set of beliefs that Mike put forth, I definitely view that way. And that might seem harsh, but then at the same time, it's kind of hard to have another impression than that when someone says things like, I'm trying to keep down the power of the people that aren't in the intellectual class. That kind of thing, it's hard to not read arrogance into that sort of statement. Because personally, and I'll get into this later, I have a problem with the concept of classes, period. But I realize that just as human nature, they do sort of come into existence without necessarily having to be prodded too much. But to, reinforce that and even want to strengthen it, to me, not only seems wrong, but it's actually, from a typology point of view, kind of strange to hear for me from an NF. A lot of the stuff that Mike put forward in the Scholarchy really wouldn't surprise me at all coming from an NT. So it's kind of funny that he said that, he got a lot of responses from NTs and many, disapproving of it, because it seems a whole lot more like something an NT would be in favor of. That you could have this, that somehow intellectualism, as presented by Mike, should be the source of power, in terms of affecting government and even other things. So, to me, my first impression, just seeing it from a type point of view, was that an NF, it seems like to me, especially an older, more mature one like Mike, would have encountered enough people and seen enough different experiences and heard and read, in his many years of college, would have come across so many different ways of experiencing the world, so many different experiences and backgrounds and just life in general from so many different people that he wouldn't have what to me seems like a very narrow-minded view that power and worth even is determined by the number of degrees you have from a particular, from an institution of so-called formal education. So that struck me as kind of being almost sort of, against the NF way, you might say, in terms of what I have generally gotten from a lot of NF people in my life is much more of a feeling of openness with how people experience life is their own personal experience, and that it's valuable regardless of what particular formal training, what background, what system, what culture one particular person comes from, that their worth and their power and their status in life is not determined by all these arbitrary things, but is more that they have an inherent worth as a person, and that their lifestyle, their background, or all these other things, there's a variety of all of this, and it's a good thing that there's variety. So it struck me first as being very kind of, the idea that there should be this exclusive club of, the empowered educational elite, struck me as a little bit odd considering, the general usual kind of NF way of accepting people from a lot of different experiences. And so when Mike said, I'm not talking about individuals, I'm talking about a class of people, like I said, that in itself bothers me, thinking of people in terms of classes, that you would dismiss people and say, well, these lower class or these, anti-intellectual or whatever, you want to call them, are these unworthy beings that we need to strip the power away from. I can understand, like, feeling those as, like, gut reactions to things, like, if an election doesn't turn out the way you want it to, or a ballot initiative, or, or some particular policy thing goes against you, I understand those kind of knee-jerk reactions, like, okay, those such and suches, are the ones that made this happen. I realize everybody does that to a certain extent, but to then, sit down and have time to think about it and have these well thought out, supposedly, presentations about it, it seems to me at that point you're not talking knee-jerk reaction here. You've actually thought about this and formed this idea that this class of people needs to be kept down, and that I just have a huge problem with. But I realize that part of that is definitely a temperament thing, because I believe that, Mike has talked a lot about the NF collective, and it seems to me, my experience is that NFs are the people probably the most likely to talk about people that way, as being a collective. We're all sort of this connected body rather than a set of individuals. But SPs, this is one area where SPs and NFs are like complete opposites, because the SPs are the least likely to think of people in those terms, because individualism and individual freedom is such a huge part of just our entire mentality, that anyone trying to place us in classes and categories and all these things is like a offensive concept to us on its face. It's not that we don't sometimes accept, membership into groups or categories and things like that. Obviously, me identifying myself even as an SP to start with is me doing that. But of course, as I've already talked about in earlier videos, that didn't come naturally to me either. I kind of had to come to a point where I could realize the value in that. But coming to a point where I'm going to realize that everyone is, part of this collective, that I don't think is going to happen. That song Imagine by John Lennon, I hate that song. And I'm not the only one, to kind of paraphrase it a little bit. That idea of, everybody joins hands and there's no boundaries and we're just this collective group of what to me, that's what's the point of that? When you rob someone of their individuality, you rob them of everything that makes someone cool. You take out all the essence of the greatness of having individual beings is the things they can come up with individually, and not some kind of mass collective. Anyway, I'm getting off track a little bit from what I intended to talk about, so this is probably going to end up having to be in two parts. Um, I will fully admit that Mike is more concise than I am. At least in his NF Geeks videos, in other things he may not as be, but on those he's made an effort to try to keep them somewhere in the 15, 17-minute range, whereas I know I tend to ramble sometimes. Okay, well, the next thing he said was he talked about outliers. He said that the responses had been, well, think about these people that have been college dropouts that have accomplished these amazing things. And his defense or his response to that was, well, those are outliers. That's not a typical, representation of what happens when somebody drops out of college. Um, and the question that brings up in me is, how many does it take before they're not outliers anymore? Because, I mean, when you think about it, there have been a ton of people that have accomplished amazing things, whether it be, in innovation and technology and things like that, like the ones he mentioned in Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, but a lot of people in various levels of business, in the entertainment industry, in sports, and in a lot of areas, there have been a tremendous amount of people that have succeeded and made a ton of money and been very popular and accomplished great things without college degrees. And so my question is, like, how many of those does it take before they're not considered outliers anymore, and it's just considered that a formal college degree is one path to take, but it is not in any way established to be superior when it comes to quite a bit of things. Mike talked about the larger experience you have from getting a college degree. It's funny because I've lost count of how many stories that I've heard from people who graduated from college, and when they talk about college, they describe it in terms of like, yeah, I don't really remember much about that. It was kind of a blur. I went to a lot of frat parties and I blacked out for a lot of it, and so if that's your idea of a larger experience, then I guess you're right. But again, Mike might even say that those are outliers. But the thing is, I encounter those people all the time, and not just in my own hometown where I happen to live, but other places I've gone, people on the internet, everyone that I've come in contact with, I'm constantly hearing stories from people that have college degrees that, in terms of what they got out of it, some kind of larger experience of somehow they're more enlightened or super educated. It just isn't true. To me it's a very narrow presentation of that experience. There's so many different college experiences, just as there are so many experiences out of college. That the idea that that somehow you have a larger or more worthwhile experience because you happen to have more degrees, that's just preposterous to me. Education is not about degrees. It's about personal effort, really. I mean, Mike's assertion that somehow people that didn't graduate from college are somehow all a bunch of lazy people that just that can't make it through a Wikipedia article and that sort of stuff. Again, it's just asinine. I mean, there's tons of people who have self-educated themselves tremendously, and I would take them any day over somebody who happens to have a degree but basically coasted through college and doesn't really remember 80% of what they learned. And he kind of, to me, another thing that insulted me was he kind of did this thing where he talked about particular jobs like they become waiters and waitresses and work at Walmart, as if these were somehow some kind of degrading jobs or something, that somehow your life is devoid of worth if you work at one of these jobs, that somehow you're not getting a large enough experience of life, which that to me is ridiculous. I mean, there are some people that enjoy being a waiter or waitress, and even some people enjoy working at Walmart. I've encountered plenty of people that work there that weren't particularly, didn't particularly enjoy their experience, but there's others who did. The company I work for actually has, a restaurant inside a Walmart, so I talk with employees, people that have worked there all the time, and most of the people that have worked there have had a pretty positive experience. Not everybody, of course, but and I haven't heard a lot of people who worked there that had some kind of lament of, oh well, if only I had studied harder, I wouldn't have to work at Walmart, or but there's not a whole lot of that mentality. So it's almost as if Mike is degrading entire huge large groups of people that don't place worth on the same things he does, and to just kind of push, try to push those people down and say, well, these people need to have their power taken away because they don't value the same things I value. I mean, that to me is just really mind-boggling, and again, just an example of something that to me seems like really kind of almost dehumanizing, to try to place people in this higher class just because they have college degrees. And so that's to me, another example of what I was talking about with the arrogance, to think that Mike mentioned specific books as if somehow, oh well, they didn't read this, and that somehow makes you superior if you've read those particular books, um, and again, just really amazing to me that that would be the measure of worth. But all right, so I've hit the 17-minute mark, so I'm going to go ahead and stop this one and resume in part two. So if you still haven't been completely bored or turned off by me yet, then feel free to go to the next one.